Hello everyone, we're on our final two example problems of the section. Alright, and what we're going to be doing is combining all the stuff we talked in the unit. So not only are we going to combine our transformations, so we're going to have more than one transformation in the problem, which is pretty exciting, but we're also going to take the last problems that we did a step further. So if you see here in these problems, I gave you g of x, we studied the transformation, and then we solved. What we're doing now is I gave you the transformations, and you're coming up with an equation first of all. So we're kind of reversing it. Last time, I gave you an equation, and then you studied the transformation. Now I'm stating the transformations, and you have to come up with your equation. And after we have an equation that looks something like this, like before, we're going to solve for it. So we're taking basically what we did in the last step, one or two steps further. It's going to be pretty incredible. Okay, so I have our nifty function notation right here in case we need it. Okay, so here's our f of x, 3x to the 5th minus 9. And in example 11, it says g of x compresses f of x vertically by a factor of 1/3 and moves f of x right 4 units. So first of all, let's figure out what the transformations are because I need to know what the A, B, H, and K are because that will tell me where they go in my nifty equation. And then after that, I can solve the nifty equation. So let's get going. It says g of x compresses f of x vertically by a factor of 1/3. So let's talk about what this vertically by a factor of 1/3 means. All this. So remember, anything that deals with vertical stuff, so vertically compresses, stretches, or vertically reflects, is an A value. So this is dealing with an A value. Alright, and it vertically compresses by a factor of 1/3. So our A value is just 1/3. Remember, the A value, we do not have to find the reciprocal. If this would have said horizontally compresses by a factor of 1/3, then I would have been flipping, okay, but it would have said, I guess, horizontally stretching by 1/3, but we're not going to get into that right now. Okay, but anyway, so our A value is 1/3. Okay, so the A value, if you see here, goes before F. So in my nifty equation, it will also go before the F. Holy hot dog, right? And finally, it says it moves F of x right 4 units. So let's talk about what this moves right 4 units. So if we're going right, we're going left to right, which remember the variable that deals with left to right is the one that pertains to the hips, which is h. So hips move left to right, so that's our h value. So this is an h value. Okay, and if it moves right 4 units, remember we think the opposite with the h value. So this is going to be x minus 4. Okay, remember you guys, the x value goes inside of the parenthesis and adds or subtracts to the x. So this will be x minus 4. Alright guys, that's our equation. So now we need to solve for g of x. So remember, whenever I do this, I start with the parenthesis. And remember, everything inside my parenthesis up here goes in the parenthesis here. Okay, so everything inside my parenthesis will go in there. And everything outside the F or outside the parenthesis will remain outside the parenthesis in the same spot. So since this 1/3 is in front of the F of x, guess what you guys? The 1/3 will remain in front of the parenthesis. So the 1/3 goes there. Alright, then this F of x minus 4 is going to go in here. Alright, but before I do that, I need to do some side work to figure out what f of x minus 4 is. So you guys, whenever anything is in the parenthesis, you need to do some side work to figure out what it's going to be. Because remember, all the x's are now going to transform into the x minus 4. I wonder if this x minus 4 is what I was trying to write over here when I messed up this problem. Maybe I was predicting what was happening in this problem. I don't know. I still apologize for that, you guys. I don't know what I was thinking over there. But anyways, so we need to solve for f of x minus 4. So anytime you have something in the parenthesis, we're going to do some scratch work to figure out what that is. Alright, so let's write down f of x. F of x is 3x to the 5th minus 9. So this means all my x's are going to transform into x minus 4, which means this x right here is going to change. And that's the only thing that will change, you guys. It's going to change into x minus 4. So this is going to be 3 parenthesis x minus 4 raised to the 5th. My x transform into an x minus 4. And then I bring everything else down. I bring down my x minus 9 and my 3. And remember, you guys, I'm not going to make you solve that out because that's like x minus 4 5 times. It's like x minus 4 times x minus 4 times x minus 4 times x minus 4 times x minus 4. And I'm not quite that mean. I mean, it's pretty fun to multiply all that stuff out, but I'm not going to make you waste your time doing that. So this, you guys, is f of x minus 4, which means this is what goes inside my parenthesis. So I have 3 times x minus 4 to the 5th minus 9. All this goes in my parenthesis because it's in the parenthesis here. All right, guys, we have one more step, okay? We have a number outside of parenthesis. So guess what, you guys? We have to distribute this 1/3 to each term. So when we do this, this is all one term, you guys. And the reason why I know, you guys, remember, terms are things that are multiplied together. So although this has a minus sign in it, it has an exponent, which, remember, we would have to multiply that out 5 times in order to figure out what that is. Okay, so we'd have to do that 5 times, which we don't have time to do all that. Okay, so this is all one term. So we're going to distribute the 1/3 to this term, and we're going to distribute the 1/3 to this term, and then we'll be done. Okay, so g of x equals, when we distribute 1/3 to this term, let's think about it. What's the only thing in this term I can multiply 1/3 to? What's the only thing like the 1/3? You guys are so smart. The 3 is the only thing like the 1/3. I cannot distribute 1/3 into this parentheses, you guys, because this parenthesis has an exponent. And you're supposed to do exponents before you multiply. I would have had to do all this first before I could distribute 1/3 into it, which we're not doing all that. Okay, so I'm only going to multiply the 1/3 to the 3. So remember, whenever you have a number, underneath the 1, that's like dividing by that number. So this is like 3 divided by 3, and 3 divided by 3 is 1. So this is like 1 parenthesis x minus 4 to the 5th, which, remember, you can write 1 times x minus 4 to the 5th, or just x minus 4 to the 5th. All right, then we're going to do 1/3 times -9, or -9 divided by 3, which is -3. And guys, that would be my final answer. This is the equation. If you were, again, to go into Desmos or on your calculator and graph that, then type this in, this equation would vertically compress it, so it would shrink vertically by 1/3, and then it would move right 4 spaces. So it would shrink by 1/3 and then move right. Pretty cool, pretty cool. Alright, guys, so example 12. It's our final example problem. If you felt like you got example 11, I encourage you to try example 12 on your own without my help and see if you get the right answer at the end. Okay? Alright, guys, so same idea. First, we're going to come up with our nifty equation, and then we're going to solve for the equation. Okay, and this equation is based off of the transformations in the problem. So it says g of x reflects f of x across the y-axis and moves f of x down 3 units. So it's going to bring it on down. Okay, so let's start with this reflecting across the y-axis nonsense right here. So if we reflect across the y-axis, we are kind of reflecting in a horizontal motion. And remember, you guys, the thing that deals with horizontal stuff, horizontally stretching, compressing, and reflecting is the b value. And remember, b values and a values that reflect are always negative. So the b value is a -1. Okay, so whenever you reflect either across the x or the y-axis, it will make the a or the b value a -1. So my b value is multiplied to the x. So it's inside of my parenthesis. So it'll be -1 times the x, or just -1x. So I could write it like that, or I could write g of x equals f of -x, either way. Okay, you could write it like that, or negative 1 times x, or you could write it as negative 1 or negative x. Okay, so negative 1 times x, negative x, or negative 1x, either way. All right, guys, and then finally, it says, and moves f of x down 3 units. So we're going to go down 3 units. Okay, so if we're going up and down, remember we're thinking kangaroo, so the kangaroo that goes up and down pertains to the k value. So this is a k value. So this whole moving down 3 units is a k value. And remember, you guys, the k value, we do not think the opposite. So if it's going down 3, it'll be a negative 3k value. Okay, and k is on the very end and is outside of our parenthesis. So outside my parenthesis, I'm going to write minus 3. All right, guys, this would be our equation, and now we need to solve this equation, and then we will be donezo with this problem, which is kind of sad because I don't really want to be donezo yet. All right, so we start with our g of x, and remember, I always like to put my nifty parenthesis, and anything in the parenthesis goes in here. So this is in my parentheses, so it's going to go in here. So this will be f of negative x, or f of negative 1x. I'm going to leave it as negative 1x, and I'll explain why in just a moment. All right, now we need to figure out where this negative 3 is going to go. Does it go in front of the parenthesis, in the parenthesis, or behind the parenthesis? Well, first of all, negative 3 is not in the parentheses, so it's not going in the parentheses. And my minus 3 is after the final parenthesis. So guess what, you guys? It's still going to go behind the parenthesis. Alright, now before we solve, we need to figure out what this f of negative 1x is. Which remember, anytime we have something inside the parentheses, we got to do some scratch work. So I'm going to do some scratch work over here for our f of negative 1x. Alright, so f of x is 3x to the 5th minus 9. So f of x is 3x to the 5th minus 9. But we are solving for f of negative 1x. So it was x, but if you see here, all my x's have transformed into a negative 1x, which means all my x's over here will transform into a negative 1x. So let's get going. Okay, so it's going to be 3. I see an x, and my x will now become negative 1x. All right, and then raised to the 5th minus 9. All right, so since this is a monomial, since we only have one term, I actually want you to solve for what it is. Remember, binomials, like this has 2 terms. I'm not going to make you solve that because that's a lot of stuff to multiply out. But we can do this, you guys. So remember, this is secretly, let's see here, f of negative 1x equals 3. Now, guys, well, actually, I'm not going to do that. I'm not going to do that. I have a better way of showing you, I've determined at the last second. Alright, let's talk about what this negative 1x to the 5th is. Let's talk about that before we write out what f of negative 1x is. So remember, you guys, when you have more than one number raised to an exponent and they're multiplying together, you raise each of those to that exponent. So this is like negative 1 to the 5th times x to the 5th. Alright, let's figure out what negative 1 to the 5th is. So negative 1 times negative 1 is positive 1, and positive 1 times negative 1 is negative 1. Negative 1 times negative 1 is positive 1, and positive 1 times negative 1 is negative 1. Okay, so a negative number to an odd exponent will always give you a negative, and a negative number to an even exponent will always give you an even, or will always give you a positive. So this right here, you guys, is 1x to the 5th. So that's what all that is right there. Alright, so now let's talk about what it is. So f of negative 1x equals 3 times all that minus 9. Alright, so 3 times 1 is 3, and all we have left is an x to the 5th. So we have 3x to the 5th, and then minus 9. Yay, we've solved for f of negative 1x. Okay, so that is what goes in my parentheses. So remember, anytime you have something in a parenthesis, you need to solve for it before we insert it into here. Okay, so this will be 3x to the 5th, and hold on, you guys. Geez, this is not my night, you guys. Negative 1, which I just said, negative 1 an odd amount of times is a negative number, which will make this a negative because 3 times negative 1 is a negative. I'm sorry, guys. Apparently, Miss Lowe needs to go to bed right now. Okay, so again, sorry, guys. Backtrack. I said it, but I didn't write it for some reason. Okay, so a negative, an odd amount of times is a negative answer. Negative 1 times negative 1 is positive 1, times negative 1 is negative 1, times negative 1 is positive 1, times negative 1 is negative 1. So this will be a negative 1, and 3 times negative 1 is negative 3. So it will be negative 3x to the 5th minus 9. Alright, so let's see if we can finish this problem without screwing up one more time. Sorry, guys. Okay, so again, anytime you have something in a parenthesis, you need to do some scratch work to solve for what goes in here. Okay, so I have nothing that's multiplying in my parenthesis. The only thing I have going on outside the parenthesis is something added or subtracted. So remember, you guys, whenever you have something added or subtracted, all we do is simply drop the parenthesis and combine our like terms. So we have g of x equals negative 3x to the 5th minus 9, and then I dropped on my parentheses, so I'm just going to bring down my negative 3. Alright, after this, you guys, we just combine our like terms, which the only like terms are the negative 9 and the negative 3. So g of x will equal negative 3x to the 5th, and negative 9 minus 3 more will be negative 12. And bam, this will give me the equation that if you were to graph f of x and then graph this one, this would reflect f of x across the y-axis and move the graph down 3 units. Oh man, you guys, that was so thrilling. I hope you guys had as much fun as I did.